Hi everybody, my name's Kerri. I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be here with all of you this morning. It's nice to see some familiar faces. I do have experience with this work as it's laid out in the big book. With the help of a loving sponsor and a loving God, and many meetings like this, I continue to be willing to make some amends that are left on my list, and I practice the principles of this work in my life on a daily basis. And Jocelyn, thank you for inviting me to speak. It's always an honor to speak, and it's a good feeling to be in a room on a Saturday morning surrounded by people who understand me. And the good news this morning is there is a solution, right? But as I was reading along with all of you, I was remembering when I first got here and I first started reading these chapters and starting to understand what the book was actually saying, that there is a solution was actually kind of hard for me to swallow and wasn't very comforting, because I didn't want the solution. The solution seemed like a lot of work to me, and I didn't want to do the work, honestly. I just wanted to get better without doing the work. But what we read today kind of outlines a journey of work that is necessary for us to recover from a hopeless state of mind and body, and that's in our reading today. Like, how awesome would it be to recover from that hopeless state of mind and body? I can remember in active addiction feeling like it's never going to get better. This in the insanity of my disease was that it brought me to blocked psych wards as a result of suicide attempts and suicide threats, because the pain of living had gotten that great, and I felt like the only solution that I had was to end my life, that would be easier than what's outlined in this book. And you know, like, when I was reading along with you today, I was remembering and reflecting back on my journey in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I remember coming in and being very nervous and being very scared, but also being comforted by the people in the room, and having an experience where, like, an aha experience where I kind of sat back and I thought to myself, look at these people, like they're laughing and they're smiling and they're sober. And that was so foreign to me and seemed so, I couldn't comprehend that thought. Like, I felt very uncomfortable. And I heard people explain that. Like, yeah, I felt uncomfortable in my own skin. That was me, you know. But then I would sit back at meetings and see people hugging each other and laughing and smiling and talking about other things that they were doing in life. And as a newly sober alcoholic, that seemed very far-fetched for me. But and I'm reminded of that at the very start of this chapter when it talks about really like the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and the common bond that we share, and it talks about the passengers of a shipwreck, and we are people who normally would not mix, right? But we come together and we comfort each other and we support each other, and that's been my experience in AA. I've met people that I wouldn't have met in the outside world through the program, and these are people who have become my people, my tribe. People who would do anything for me, people who have shown me the way, people who I owe a debt of gratitude for, because of the life that I can live today, because of their support, and also knowing that I have that network of people in my life to lean on today, that I very much consider my spiritual network, which we talk about in this reading today, like a spiritual experience. We talk about spiritual growth, and all of that stuff seemed really overwhelming to me in the beginning, but what didn't feel so overwhelming was that camaraderie that the book describes, the reading that we read today. in the people in the room. That didn't feel so overwhelming to me. It felt comforting, and that's where I started. And then, today I talked about, I said, there is a solution. That's the good news and the bad news for me, because as we read on and it started describing my experience was as we started describing different types of alcoholics and having these moments when I read this book with my sponsor and being like, oh shit, they're really describing me, I can't deny that. I did not, and we talk about in There's a Solution, could restore us to sanity, the second part of 2, could restore us to sanity. And to be restored to sanity, I have to come to terms with the fact that I'm insane. And I didn't really want to admit that. I didn't even really think about that, honestly. But I do know, what I know today was that my thoughts brought me to psych wards, and professionals in those hospitals would tell me that I had a problem, and here's the solution, here's what you should do. And they would say I should go to AA, I should get a sponsor, I should do this work. I should stop drinking. First, I had to stop drinking. And I would think to myself, I'll find a different way. I don't need to do what they're telling me to do. There's the insanity of my disease, right? Many people have heard my story before, will remember that I filed formal complaints about doctors in the hospital because they called me an alcoholic. To be called an alcoholic in detox, oh my God. And that was just that was the cycle of insanity I was in. I was doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. People who knew what they were talking about, people who had a solution, were handing it to me, and I was saying, no thanks, I'll find a different way, because I really felt like a life without alcohol was not possible. And furthermore, it was something I didn't want. What I wanted was to figure out a way to still have alcohol in my life and be okay. And what I learned here was that I couldn't do that. First, I had to put alcohol down. I had to abstain from drinking. So when I walked into my first meetings, I think I had come to a place where I was like, okay, maybe they're right. Maybe I can't drink. Like they described in the book, not having control. That's where I was at, was that I realized that I wanted to stop, but I couldn't stop. And there's another line in the book that I feel like it doesn't get enough attention, but it stands out in my mind all the time, is we cannot solve the riddle. We read that today. We cannot solve the riddle. And that was my insanity. I kept trying to solve the riddle. And I kept trying to figure out how come, because I thought if I could figure out how come I'm an alcoholic, then I could figure out a way to drink, if I knew the reason why. We cannot solve the riddle just gives me a sense of peace, because in saying that out loud, I also am internalizing letting go. Right, letting go of that control that I was trying to find that I really didn't have. So I stopped drinking. I came to AA. I got involved. I surrounded myself with the people of this program. I started to feel better. Relationships in my life started to come back. I wasn't in trouble at work anymore. I wasn't sick every day. And that felt good, that felt good. And I was going on my way. I was speaking at the podium all the time. I was going to a meeting every single day. And things were starting to get better, but what wasn't getting better was my thinking, was what was going on up here. And what was going on up here for me was still self-pity. Life had not turned out the way I wanted it to turn out, and those were my thoughts. And I didn't want to I started to understand the work that they talk about that needs to be done to recover from this disease, and I didn't want to do that. And the thoughts in my head were, this is it, I'm just going to go to work, I'm going to go to meetings, and this is what life's going to be like. And it was restless, irritable, and discontent, and that's where I was at when I was introduced to the steps. I was about a year sober. And I was introduced, I feel fortunate that I was introduced to this process in this step work. I haven't done my steps in another format, although there's many different ways to do the steps. This format was very thorough and helpful to me, and gave me clear-cut directions that I needed to recover from this disease. And I started my journey reading with my sponsor, and kind of the journey that I started to describe today, like the comfort of the fellowship, and then coming to learn that I have an illness. And I came here thinking I had a relationship problem. I was 29, I was going through a divorce, I was pissed off that my friends were getting married, buying houses, and having babies, and I was all alone. I was drowning in my own self-pity. And I, thought that if I could fix that relationship in my life, everything would fall into place and everything would be okay. It was here where I realized that that wasn't my truth. And that I did have a problem with drinking, that when I wanted to stop, I could not stop. I can picture myself in front of the refrigerator getting another drink and being like, how did I do this again? Like in the reading today, it said, it describes that, like, and you have the sixth strength, and you're like, what's the use anyhow? Like, I can see myself in that scenario. I was there so many times where I was like, okay, I'll just have one, I'll just have two. And then I'm on 6, and I say, what's the use anyhow? I'm going to get shit-faced, and then tomorrow I'll try to stop. And then the next day being like, how did I do this again? How did I get here again? Or being so desperate over a relationship, so desperate over the way life turned out that I make an attempt on my life and I end up back in the hospital, and I say, how did I get here again? How did I do that again? Because in between these times, I would give myself pep talks about how I was going to do things differently. I was, and that's the problem. It's the I. How am I going to do things differently? How am I going to fix this? The solution wasn't me. The solution is outside of me, and that's what I've learned here. And so I came thinking I had a relationship problem, learned that I had an alcohol problem. I had to put alcohol down, and then this chapter tells me I have a thinking problem. And that I need to work on my thinking. And the solution for me was going through these steps and living this principled life through this. This book is my directions for life. This is how I walk through life. When I say I live the principles of these steps in my life on a daily basis, that's what I do, and what's talked about in this chapter is the process. It says, almost none of us liked the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confessions of shortcomings which the process requires for its successful consummation. So that was kind of like the bad news for me, like there was some work to be done. My experience is that the pain got great enough and I became willing to do the work, and I commenced this journey and I did the steps, and it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I have a lot of friends who describe it as gentle, and that was my experience. I connected with another woman who had experience going through these steps. She showed me exactly what she did. There was no judgment. I started writing a 4th step. I did a 5th step. She brought me through 6 and 7. I began to start making amends. In my life, I started to heal. I started to change. there's a lot of promises in this reading too. Like I just have a really good feeling when we read the first page about the shipwreck and all the people that have come into my life. Is what that makes me think of. And then later on in the chapter, it talks about being rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence, which we had never dreamed. That's my experience. The closer I stay to this work, the more gratitude I have in my life, a better understanding I have of how my brain works and what I need to do to be well. In those things today, what it looks like is I stay connected to the program. I continue to go to meetings. I continue to do inventories, daily inventories, so that I'm always looking at my thinking. And I share that with other people when I need to. I share that with my higher power. And I share those inventories with other people because I have broken thinking, and I need to keep that in check. I need to be reminded of that. I need to be reminded of the tools I have in this program to help me keep that in check so that I can live the life that I live today and enjoy and appreciate all the many gifts I have in my life today. It's like a whole new world for me, I have a family today. I have responsibilities today. I show up today. All these things feel good, but all of those things can be overwhelming too. And I have to have this work in my life to keep the gratitude up front and center and to stay out of that the self-pity that I was drowning in, because life happens, and I don't react in the same way anymore because the steps have helped me change my thinking. I often talk about the steps. The fellowship of AA kept me safe. The steps saved my life because it changed my thinking, and changing my thinking changed my reaction to the world around me. And because of that today, I do believe and feel in my heart that I've recovered from that hopeless state of mind and body. I wish that for all of you. I wish that I could wave my magic wand and give to you what I have in my heart, but it doesn't work that way. Like I talked about today, I hope that if you're suffering, if you're in pain, that you consider this work because it's so worth it. It can bring you out of that pain. The greatest gift I have today is that sense of peace in my heart that no matter what's going on in my life, I'm going to be okay. And I wish that for all of you. Thank you.